I'm Jonathan Goldstein, host of Wiretap. Each week you're invited to listen in on my telephone conversations, whether funny, sad, wistful, or even slightly strange. You never know just what you might hear on Wiretap.
I knew you had a show. I just didn't think that people actually listen to it.
Howard,
That's the breadth of your genius, Jonathan. It's not just that you're funny, but you can be cripplingly, poignantly depressing.
The Wiretap Archives, available on CBC Listen, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts. This is a CBC podcast.
Hi, I'm Eli Glasner, sitting in for Tom Power, and this is your Q podcast for Monday, August the 2nd. Tori Amos is one of those artists. The second you hear her, she is distinct. She is singular. There's no one that really sounds quite like her, but it's more than just her sound. It's those lyrics. It's the stories that she tells with her music and her knack for connecting with her listeners. And now she's actually put a lot of her thoughts and inspirations and what actually motivates her into a new book. She had an amazing conversation with Tom Power about making music and what she's trying to express in this new book. Now, talking about expression, Stephen Young, I think he is one of my favorite actors working today. He is fantastic. The most recent thing he's done is the film Minari, and this is a very personal film for Stephen in many ways, including what it means for him and his father. Tom had an amazing conversation with Stephen. All that and more coming up on Q. Sometimes it isn't clear what motivates someone to make art, to learn guitar, pick up a paintbrush, or type words on a page. But when you listen to Tori Amos, her motivations feel clear. You get the sense she's singing right at you, reaching for people with similar struggles. Tori Amos is a multi-platinum artist. She's been nominated for 8 Grammys. Her songs like Cornflake Girl, Silent All These Years, or Me and a Gun defined a generation of music listeners in the 1990s. And last year, Tori published a book about why she's a musician, the things that motivate her to do what she does. The book is called Resistance, a songwriter's story of hope, change, and courage. Tom Power spoke with Tori Amos at the beginning of the pandemic from Cornwall, England, where she lives. And just before you hear this conversation, a warning that it deals with some difficult subject matter, including themes of sexual assault and rape.
Hi, Tori. How are you?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Lovely to have you. How's self-isolation going?
We're learning all kinds of things. I think my husband, he's sort of somebody who likes to be alone, and we have a full house here. So I think that he's coping brilliantly, and I'm really grateful that we're here, to be honest with you, because we're at the studio, so we can make music.
You've said that writing this book is the hardest thing you've ever done. Why?
I didn't realize how hard writing a book was. Maybe because music is my first language, it always has been, that it just made sense. Music makes sense to me. And then the words work with melody and chordal combinations, and then the bones of a song, it just shows itself. And so the words come in relationship with the music, whereas I didn't have the music as part of my collaborator, really. So this was different for me. I had to find the rhythm without the music for the book.
You know, some of the stories that I enjoy the most in the book are the stories of sort of these formative experiences. And at a very young age, you kind of had sort of a peek behind the curtain that most people don't get until they're much, much older. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about it. You were playing piano bars in Washington, D.C. What did you see there?
Oh, goodness. Well, my father took me. My father's a minister, and it was about 1976, and I had been kicked out of the conservatory at the Peabody at 11. So he was devastated and wanted to break my failing streak, so to speak. So he had his minister's outfit on, and we knocked all around Georgetown, and finally the last place, Mr. Henry's, they let us in. and it was a gay bar. I didn't know that until I looked up and realized they were all staring at my father, and they asked me if he was in a costume. And I said, no, he's really a minister. And then they decided to help us and figure out this bar scene, which, they actually did. They helped us.
It was a bit of a political awakening, too. I think you got to see how the sausage was made a little bit in the country.
Oh, yeah. That came a little later when I was a little more experienced at 15. And I started playing the happy hour circuit in the hotels. And that was, that's where the lobbyists would gather. I called it the liquid handshake. And I didn't really understand until waiters and maitre d's started explaining to me how it worked and how deals were made and the different groups. And it pretty much blew my mind. And I played 3 blocks from the White House during the 1980 election when Ronald Reagan beat Jimmy Carter.
It can make you cynical, can't it? To have these sort of idealistic visions of how government is for the people and by the people and how we're all looking after one another and how we vote people into power. And then when you're young and you're in this place where you see people lobbying, as you said, sort of, helping one another out, sort of doing backroom deals. It didn't seem to make you cynical, though.
Well, I think I've put it in my work. I wanted to get out of Washington, but I couldn't leave until I was 21. So I played professionally there since 13 till I turned 21, and then I went out to L.A. And it wasn't until later that I really valued having, as you say, a look-see behind the curtain, because it started to really inform my work. And it's been influencing me ever since, especially with the years rolling on and different issues coming up.
I mean, the issues you talk a lot about in the book, is the Iran hostage crisis, to 9/11, the election of U.S. President Donald Trump. When you respond to moments like this, is it about you processing them, or is it about you trying to do something about them?
Well, I feel that as a writer, you're kind of searching for your true north and what that is. And everybody has to, I think, write toward their true north, is what I've called it in the book. And sometimes it takes a while for a writer to realize their calling. When I was younger, I was writing a lot about teenage, going through those things. I started writing pretty young. And so, those kinds of relationship struggles that you have as a teenager. And I continued writing about them. But also I began to get more interested in what the powerful were up to. And I think that seed was planted when I was a teenager, playing for these very powerful but corrupt, many were corrupt men. And it was pretty unbelievable to me to realize how few hold such power and how they can be owned and bought.
Is the goal with the music to raise awareness about these things? Are you of the belief that music could potentially change these things?
Well, music powered the revolution in the 60s, didn't it? For the civil rights movement, as well as dealing with the Vietnam War. And they were amazing writers talking about these things. And I watched the effect that music had on people. And so with all of these messages that are being put out there, I think that it's really essential that we take the narrative back. And artists, if you're called to write about this stuff, then it's about unveiling people's emotions and what they think and what they believe and reflecting that back and empowering them to make up their own minds.
In terms of reflecting people's emotions back to them, a performance of yours that really sticks out to me was, I'll tell you, so when I was a kid, my best friend at the time, his sister was the biggest fan of your music, and she had posters all over her wall. And I was curious about who that was, and so she gave me records, and I listened to it, and I was always really fascinated by it. And then I remember after 9/11, about a week afterwards, you went on the David Letterman show, and you performed "Time" by Tom Waits, and it felt like communion. It felt like just what you were talking about, trying to reflect emotions back to the audience.
The smart money is on the hollow, and the moon is in the street. And the shadow boys years of breaking all the laws.
But I can't imagine what it was like to be in it. What do you remember from that?
The responsibility was huge, Tom, because I'd been in Midtown on 9/11, and we were promoting this record of covers called Strange Little Girls, all written by men. Tom Waits' song being on that record. And we were touring in about 2.5 weeks or so. And so after a few days, they found a rock and roll bus with 2 drivers. So my tour manager at the time and a couple people that were on my team asked if they could jump on the bus. And so we drove straight down to Florida, where my husband Mark and our 1-year-old daughter Tash was. And while we were driving down there, I did not see a country committed to war yet. I didn't see that, and I didn't feel that. And we were at truck stops all the way down. So you can imagine, truckers, you can get a sense of where a certain part of the country is just by keeping your ears open. They would come over to us when they knew we were from New York, and they would put our arms around us. And they were grieving, but they were looking for leaders to guide us through this. And I don't know if you remember, but so much love was being sent to America from so many people, from so many countries. And so on our way back, after Letterman had called, saying they were going back on air and asked me to be the first music, they weren't going to have music on the first night, which they didn't. And then we would do the second show. And I kept thinking, what song is the right song for this time? Thinking, our leaders, they have to make the right decision. I didn't know until I heard that Imagine by John Lennon had been banned. I heard that many days after the David Letterman show. But then I understood the narrative and that they didn't want the masses to imagine the world living life in peace, because songs can be dangerous, and especially in the hands of dangerous men. And so I chose Time, and I felt that was the message the country needed to hear.
And it's time, time, time. And it's time, time, time that you love. And it's time, time, time. Well,
I can't imagine what it was like, just unintellectually, just emotionally, to stand there and perform that.
You have to ground yourself. You're not you anymore. That's really the key. When people ask me, I remember a young artist coming up to me on the 2002-2003 tour, Scarlet's Walk, which was after this. And she said to me, all that power you have up there. She said, I want that. And I just said, that is not my power. That's the power of the muses, and we serve them. That is our obligation. That is our duty. We serve them, and we're vessels for them. And then when they leave, we have to realize, you have to hand it back. You have to hand that energy and that feeling back to the songs and the muses. And that's really how you serve them.
To keep on this, just take a listen to this.
what if I'm a mermaid in these jeans of his with her name still on it? Hey, but I don't care, 'cause sometimes I said, sometimes I hear my voice, and it's been silent all these years.
That's a little bit of Silent All These Years from your 1992 album, Little Earthquakes. My guest is Tori Amos. Her new book, Resistance, A Songwriter's Story of Hope, Change, and Courage is out now. So you said that the song is one of the most important songs to you personally, that it helped you survive a pretty severe personal and an artistic crisis. What does it feel like to go back to them, to have to revisit the songs for this book?
In some ways, it's like meeting friends again. Dear, dear friends who've never betrayed you. Not that all friends do, I'm not saying that, but I am saying there's something about songs that I trust. And I trust them to show me what I need to learn that day. Because we're learning something every day, especially during these crazy times. We're having to sit with ourselves sometimes, and we're all facing different kinds of challenges. So being with these songs, I think, kind of made me realize how much they have helped me and taught me. They've taught me so much.
Years go by, will I still be waiting for somebody else to understand? Years go by, if I'm stripped of my beauty and the orange clouds raining in my head. Years go by, will I choke on my tears till finally there is nothing.
I want to compare and contrast that a little bit, if you're comfortable with that. Your song, Me and a Gun, deals with your experience of sexual assault. This is from 1992, Tori, long before sexual assault was certainly in the mainstream conversation like it is right now. What did it feel like to be talking about your experience with rape back then?
Well, I remember people didn't want me to put it on the record, and it was one of those conversations of, it has to go on the record. It's demanding to go on the record. And somebody said, but it just makes me feel terrible. I said, well, you're not supposed to feel comfortable when you listen to it, because it's not very comfortable, is it?
Was me and a gun and a man on my back, and I sang Holy, Holy as he buttoned down his pants. You can laugh, it's kind of funny, the things you think in times like these. Like I haven't seen Barbados, so I must get out of this.
This song then was requested every night, so I sang it every night for, I think, the first couple tours. And people would talk to me about their experiences. And that really began to open up my eyes about how endemic this is, not just in the States, but everywhere around the world. And that was back then. That was in the early 90s. So being part of RAINN, which is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network in the States, and watching it grow, the good news is that it's there. The hotline is there. And people can call. And the bad news is our calls are increasing every year. So that's the reality we live in right now.
Does it feel with the Me Too and Time's Up movements that the world is catching up to you a little bit?
It feels like what's positive is that people are finding their voice and speaking about their experiences. And that's what's really behind these songs, Silent All These Years. It's about finding your voice. And Me and a Gun is about being in the car with that woman who's singing to you and feeling her fear and her fight to stay alive, that was really the most imperative thought at the time, was to survive.
Your book, Resistance, is really about documenting moments of crisis and how you responded to these moments. And, Tori, now we're sort of all in a crisis. We're all in this pandemic. Do you think that everything you've lived through, everything you've spoken about, everything you've written about and sung about has given you unique perspective on this crisis that we're in right now?
Well, unique perspective. I think going through other times of trial and incredible challenge is one thing. However, this is cataclysmic, and there's so many unknowns. We were touring 2 weeks after 9/11, so we were able to gather with other people and hear their perspectives and information, although we were discouraged from touring, because I think we're back to controlling the narrative, and they really didn't want the public having a different narrative than war. So now I think as I begin to start writing songs and trying to hear what this is bringing up in people emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and the unknowns. I won't probably get to see my father for many months. He's in the States. So there are a lot of things that I think we just don't know. And that unknowing can bring up so many feelings, and that's what I feel like I need to write about now.
Tori, thanks so much for your time today. I wish you the best of luck during the pandemic, which is a thing I can't believe I just said out loud. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
I wish you the best, Tom. I wish you the best, too. And it's been great to chat. And hopefully, when we're touring again, pop backstage and see me and have a cup of tea. It'd be great to say hi and catch up.
Oh, it'd be gorgeous. You take care, Tori. Thank you so much.
You too.
Never was a cornflake girl. Thought that was a good solution, hanging with the raisin girls. She's gone to the other side, giving us a yo-heave-ho. Things are getting kind of gross, and I go at sleepy time. This is not really, this is not really happening.
That's Tori Amos with Cornflake Girl from 1994. You'll find that on her album Under the Pink, which has just been released as a limited edition double vinyl. Before that, you heard Tom Power's conversation with Tori Amos. She joined him from her home in Cornwall, England, last May. Her latest book is called Resistance, a songwriter's story of hope, change, and courage.
I am speaking to you at a moment of grave crisis.
I'm Jeff Turner, and this is Recall. It's a series about history. Not the ancient past, but history that's still hot to the touch. In this first season, I explore a revolutionary political movement that brought a modern democracy to the brink. You can find Recall, How to Start a Revolution on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts.
I am speaking to you at a moment of grave crisis.
I'm Jeff Turner, and this is Recall. It's a series about history. Not the ancient past, but history that's still hot to the touch. In this first season, I explore a revolutionary political movement that brought a modern democracy to the brink. You can find Recall, How to Start a Revolution on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Eli Glasner, filling in for Tom Power. You may remember Stephen Young from his breakout role on The Walking Dead, where he played fan favorite Glenn Rhee for 7 seasons. His latest film, Minari, is about a Korean-American family moving from California to Arkansas in the 1980s, following the father's dream to start a vegetable farm in a small town. Stephen Young plays the father, and when Tom Power had a chance to speak with him earlier this year, they talked about how the film brought him closer to his own dad. And they talked right around the time the Golden Globe nominations were announced, and Minari wasn't eligible for Best Drama because the rules say at least half the dialogue has to be in English. So they talked about that too. Their conversation began with Stephen sharing why he felt this was a role he wanted to do as soon as he read the script.
I think for me, the big draw was just the confidence it had in its own point of view. The way that it was written from a place that didn't juxtapose itself to anything else but its own existence.
How do you mean?
It didn't explain itself. It didn't try to explain this family's existence to a different audience. Instead, it just said, connect with us on a human level. And I think that was really refreshing to read. Especially for me, as an Asian American actor, I encounter scripts that try to touch upon these ideas, but oftentimes they're kind of encumbered by a larger gaze that I think it needs to justify itself towards. And with this one, it was just like, no, this is a story about a family, and that's it. And that was really cool.
Jacob seems to be fighting to be understood. Fighting to be understood as to why he would uproot his family and why he would try, after having what he could have a relatively successful career, to try and build something again from nothing. How did you think of Jacob?
That's exactly right. I think Jacob is a man desperately searching for his own destiny, to try to control his own reality. And I think it's a man that perhaps was taught as well that his existence is also conditional to the duty and the function that he serves. And I think that's sometimes where he misunderstands how to communicate his love to his family, that he thinks it's through his actions and his duty. But perhaps you could just tell them that you love them. And you can just tell them that you're sharing this experience with them too.
I heard you thought of James Dean in playing him.
Yeah. James Dean, to me, was a really interesting figure to think about with Jacob. Just someone also caught in the gaps. I think someone also not feeling fully defined and wanting everybody to understand how he defines himself. And, I thought a lot about Rebel Without a Cause when he's just shaking people around him, just like, can't you see what's happening? Like, can't you see me? And they can't. And that's kind of this loneliness and isolation and tension I think a lot of people, if not all of us, can live in. But I think with Jacob in particular, and in some ways the immigrant experience, I think that's somewhere that he kind of just is caught in.
How much did you think about your own family in making this film?
Quite a bit. I mean, I didn't try to put too much of my own family in here, but I will say, for me, also being a father of 2 young children, and also being a son of a father who had 2 children, there was a lot to learn here. There was a lot of reconnection to be made. I think to talk about like my personal experience, I think, I was born in Korea and I moved over when I was 4. And, I had the foothold and understanding of what it meant in some ways to be connected to my parents because I was 4. But then to be uprooted and brought over to Canada first. And then kind of to have this slow separation from my parents over time that I didn't even notice was happening. Because of the language barrier, because of the cultural barrier, because of the generations, you kind of get to like 30 something and you're like, oh wait, I don't know my parents at all.
Really?
They're in some ways like, I know them, but I know them through images and I know them through kind of like expectations and like calculations of who they are.
But not full humans. I mean, there does come a point in our adult life when we realize that they're human. They're not symbols, Yeah.
Yes, they're not symbols. And I think, what was tough is that perhaps if you share a language or a culture, you can have that conversation to reconnect and rebuild those disconnections. But, for a lot of second generation kids, you don't have the framework or the tools to do that. And so for me, being able to express my understanding of their reality and their humans and their humanity by playing in some ways an image also of, or an idea or a feeling of what they went through was really profound. And I got to speak with my dad. He watched it with me at Sundance. He sat next to me and, we sobbed and, it didn't bridge all the disconnections, but I think, it definitely built the framework by which we can continue to see each other a little bit clearer, I think.
What did you feel sitting next to your father that night?
I felt a lot of faith, I think.
Faith.
I think faith to me is constituted in a lot of separate feelings. I think faith to me is awe, reverence, fear, gratitude, a submission. And I think all those feelings together was a feeling that I definitely and certainly experienced shooting it. And then for me to feel that feeling and then look at my dad, and then my dad, for him to just kind of just look back at me, and it was, nobody said anything. It was just like, I see you. And that was amazing. And I think that feels faithful to me, that we can live this life and there is connection to be made if you'll open up and let go and then find it.
When you hear yourself speaking Korean in the film, do you hear your parents?
A little bit. I hear a lot of things, but yeah, I hear my parents. I hear the sucking of the teeth. I hear the clicks. I hear the deep sighs. I hear the scoffing. I hear the internal struggle.
The Golden Globe nominations just happened. Minari was ineligible for Best Drama because the rules say half the dialogue has to be in English. It's nominated for Best Foreign Language Film instead. I love how I say this as if you don't know these things. I love how I'm like, what, Tom? Really?
You got to provide context for your listeners.
Tell me how you're feeling about that. But also, I kind of want to know, what's been your favorite response to it? Or maybe like a tweet or a response to about this whole thing?
I think it's been really interesting and wonderful to find the awareness of maybe the tension that kind of is embedded in this thing in this moment. Lulu, I think, puts it really well. I can't quote her verbatim, but I think Lulu Wang, but I think she went through it herself, and that must have been so frustrating. But I think it's on a larger sense, just institutions and rules and how they can never really grasp the nuance and complexity of real life. And sometimes you need to make something that is so confusing to the system that it needs to recontextualize and expand itself in order to accommodate for that. And I think I'm thankful that I get to be part of something that makes people understand what that is, to know that while their rules might seem sound, that they might say like, well, you have to have these many English words in order to not be considered foreign language. I think that's a direct, it contradicts and kind of like opposes the reality of reality, which is, this nation is comprised of so many languages, and it is an immigrant nation. And English, while majority know how to speak it, like it is not the single fabric of this nation. And I think Americanness is being redefined. You can't blame institutions and rules for not getting that. They're not real.
What a segue here. I'm about to pat myself in the back, but what a segue is about to happen here.
What a segue.
Just hold on to your hat, man. This is about to go wild. But what I mean by that is what this makes me think about is we start off by talking about context and the ability to tell stories, not just in the lens of one context. Now we're talking about rules of institutions. And last year you signed this deal with Amazon Studios that you'll be developing and producing television series for them. What is that but freedom? I imagine you must be thinking a lot about freedom, about stories you can tell.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. I think we work alongside systems and institutions because that's also what keeps us all collectively alive and living in this society. But for me, being someone that's been able to traverse a career that has held on to, in some ways, like my own existence of feeling like trapped in the gaps, seeing life from liminal spaces that maybe not everybody else can really understand or see. And to find myself in this moment here, whatever this is, and getting these opportunities to tell stories from my perspective, I really do want to open that door up to allow other people who haven't been seen or haven't been had the privilege to declare their point of view. And I think that's kind of the sole mission for me, is just giving people the freedom to not be defined by just the tools and the labels and the boxes that we already have, but rather just saying, hey, you want to like make your own box, or just not a box at all? Do you want to just be free and say what you are? That's kind of what our intention was with Minari. And I hope I can, open the door for that same intention for other people.
What did The Walking Dead do to you to get you to this place, to get you even thinking in this way?
Privilege. Massive privilege. I think it gave me confidence. It gave me money. It gave me fame. It gave me just the ability to kind of see myself a little bit clearer without, me striving constantly to fulfill my basic needs. So yeah, privilege.
It's a pleasure to talk to you. I have to say jealously, and Gene, the producer of this piece, and I have to wrap and all that, but we were talking beforehand that, we're excited you're going to be able to make your own shows, and just as huge fans of you and Conan.
Thank you.
I hope you get to do comedy again too, man.
I appreciate that. Me too. I'm figuring out a way.
Nice to talk to you. Take care of yourself, hey?
Nice to talk to you. Yeah, thanks. You too.
That's Tom Power speaking with Stephen Young, who stars in Minari. His co-star, Yoon Ya-jung, won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her role in the film. In honor of her win, the film festival K-Cinema Celebration in Canada is offering free virtual screenings of films from her career, including the fantastic Minari. For more information, visit kccincanada.com. We'll also tweet the link. We're at CBC Radio Q. Picture this, a kid running to kick a football before it gets yanked out from under him at the last second. Lucy, or a beagle sitting on top of a doghouse, imagining himself to be a World War I pilot, or a ragged little Christmas tree bending under the weight of a single ornament. For generations now, those scenes, along with characters like Snoopy, Charlie Brown, Lucy, and Linus and the rest, they're part of so many childhoods, and they all come from one man's mind, Charles Schulz, the creator of the Peanuts comic strip. For more than 50 years, he was the only person to ever draw and write it until his death in 2000. Now his widow, Jean Schulz, is carrying on the Peanuts legacy. She consulted on a cartoon from Apple TV that launched earlier this year. It's called The Snoopy Show, and it might remind you of those classic Peanuts TV specials. But don't take my word for it. Here's Tom Power's conversation with Jean Schulz.
I am excited to talk to you a little bit about the Snoopy Show, but we're also going to talk about your late husband, who the world knows as Charles Schulz. But to you, he goes by a different name. What was that name?
Sparky. And that was a name that he was given by an uncle who visited him in the hospital and said, by golly, we're going to call him Sparkplug, after Sparkplug the horse. Sparkplug was a horse that came into the Barney Google comic strip in July, won a race, and became a hit character, and then never won another race. And he's the yellow horse with the sway back.
Charles Schulz grew up maybe to be the most influential cartoonist ever, and his nickname came from a comic strip.
I know. It's one of those small, amazing miracle things.
He wanted to draw a comic strip his whole life, didn't he?
Well, he said from the time he was 6, he knew that was what he wanted to do. And he sort of eschewed all other. I mean, he talks about being a terrible student and failing classes, but I think that's more of an exaggeration. I think he was an attentive student, but he just didn't get a lot of abstract things. He understood the abstracts of drawing, but not the abstracts of physics.
Did he see himself in Charlie Brown?
Oh, yes. He said, all the characters are a part of me. Linus, his philosophical side. Lucy, his angry, know-it-all side. Snoopy, of course, is his imagination. Everybody wants to not be in the body and the position they're in and be able to do whatever they want, and Snoopy does that.
To you, which of the Peanuts characters is most like Sparky?
Oh, I think it has to be Charlie Brown. Sparky always said, he's the person I would like to know in the whole gang out on the playground. Charlie Brown is the one people really want to know.
What do you think that says about him, about your late husband?
Well, I think he admired the gentleness, the kindness. I think he admired the introspection that Charlie Brown lived with. And as Sparky said, any game, there's one winner, everyone else loses. So being a loser is not unique.
Yeah.
We all know what it's like to lose. There is a comic strip he wrote once where everybody's cheering for whatever happened, and he said, I wonder how the other team felt. So he had an empathy. Charlie Brown's a nice young man.
Right now, we're going to hear a clip from the show we're here to talk about today, the Snoopy show from Apple TV. And this is Charlie Brown meeting Snoopy for the first time. Take a listen.
Hey there, little guy. Do you want to come live with me? Look what I have. We're going to be best friends.
That's a little bit of the Snoopy show, new from Apple TV. That's episode 1. Gene, you're a consultant on the show, which means you're sort of one of the guardians of all things Peanuts and making sure that your late husband would be happy with everything new that comes out and make sure that it builds on the world that he created and make sure it's true to his legacy. What is it about this project you think he might like the most?
I think what we loved about this project when we were approached, the entire concept was that Sparky's family and Creative Associates, his creative company, would be a part of this project going forward. But basically, they're taking everything from the comic strip and doing the animation until it mimics as much as it can the old animation, which is a slower pace than children's television had become. And I think it's also a little more thoughtful. That slower pace gives you time to think about what is actually happening.
I want to play another clip for you right now. So this is from the TV special, A Charlie Brown Christmas. Your husband wrote this himself. It came out in 1965. Of course, it is a classic. I have watched it dozens of times. Here's one of the most memorable moments from that special. This is the end of Linus's speech.
And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. That's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown.
That's Linus quoting from the Bible in A Charlie Brown Christmas. Your husband had to fight for that scene, didn't he?
Well, he did. He and Bill Melendez and Lee Mendelson sat together to create that show. They had a very short time to develop it, but in talking it through, Sparky said, and then of course we have to use that passage from the Bible. And Bill Melendez said, you can't put the Bible on television. And Sparky said, if we don't, who will? And Lee Mendelson, in his reporting on it, says at that point, Sparky got up and walked out of the room. And Lee and Bill looked at each other and said, what do you think that means? and one of them said, well, I guess we'll put it in. And, even hearing it now, divorced from the show itself, I still get
chills?
Yeah, chills. And I think that's a testament to Sparky's determination to keep his characters as true to what he created as possible. And I think it's a wonderful way to look at it that sometime if you follow your own instincts, you're going to actually find some truth that you wouldn't if you were looking for the middle ground of what was acceptable.
I want to play a clip right now. So this is from December 1999 when Charles Schulz talked to Al Roker on the Today Show about having to make the decision to stop drawing Peanuts. And this is what he had to say.
I always had the feeling that I would probably stay with the strip maybe, till I was maybe early 80s or something like that. And all of a sudden, it's gone. It's been taken away from me. I did not take this away from me. This was taken away from me.
I know it's a difficult time to think about, and those are some strong words from your late husband there. But it goes to show that principled nature that we were talking about. It's been taken away from me. I did not take this away from me. He had been diagnosed with cancer.
Yes.
What was it like for your late husband to have to stop his life's work drawing Peanuts?
Yeah, it's almost like he's saying, it's a cruel fate that makes me stop, but it's not my wish. It's very painful for me. I saw the interview the other day again, and it's just very painful because first of all, he had had a small stroke, so that he may not have been able to say exactly what he wanted to say.
Right.
But I think I'm not giving up is what to me, that's what he was saying. I'm not giving it up.
It was very important for him that, and for the Schultz family, that for Charles Schultz to be the only person to draw Peanuts at the time, right?
Well, and that he had decided that back in the mid-70s, when he revised the contract with United Media, that when he no longer drew it, no one would take it over, because the system, the tradition at comic strips was that the syndicates wanted to keep the comic strip going.
Right.
So they would simply hire another artist to do it. And in fact, United Media, who was the copyright holder at the time, had hired someone to do a couple of weeks of sample pages in case they came to a crashing point with Sparky. But as it turned out, the syndicate changed leadership, and the leadership agreed to Sparky's demand that, or contract agreement, that it would stop being drawn. New strips would stop being drawn when he stopped drawing them.
Maybe this is a good way to close things off, and I appreciate you talking about the legacy of your late husband. I appreciate you talking about his life and his way. And I have to say, I'm so moved by his principles and his compassion and his sort of rejection of commercialism. Before we go, I would love to get a personal memory here. So do me a favor if you can. Close your eyes and think of Sparky, better known to us as Charles Schultz. In your mind's eye, describe to me, paint me a picture of what you see.
Well, when you said that, I immediately thought of Sparky in his blue chair with an ottoman, with his dog on his lap. We got a wire-haired fox terrier because we wanted a dog that would be a guard dog, not a guard dog, but a noisy dog. And they're supposed to be noisy. And when we got this dog home, he never barked. And I called the place up and said, is there something wrong with him? He doesn't bark. And they said, no, he barked a lot when he was in the kennel here. So we kept Andy, and he was a wanderer. I guess wire-haired fox terriers wandered. So the second day or third day we had him, I opened the door and out he shot. And I called Sparky and I said, I'm just sick. What's the matter? Andy's gone. And he came right home, and we went to look for Andy and found him, and he would let us get a little close to him. And then as soon as we got kind of close, he'd run away. So he was a funny dog, but he ended up being Sparky's great comfort and best friend. And Sparky would come home and sit in his chair, and Andy would jump up in his lap and make this big sigh and then just sit there. And the two of them were so contented. And half the time they'd both fall asleep. And, I love that. I love thinking about that.
Yeah, it's hard not to think about Snoopy when you're telling me these stories,
Yeah. I think Sparky was a dog in another life. He had so much compassion for dogs. And he would often point to a dog doing something, and he'd say, I wonder what he thinks about that. And then he wrote a very short essay saying, do you notice when you pass a dog on the street, he'll look up and your eyes will meet, and for 1 second you'll have a communication with him. So, yeah, he was a dog.
Jean, lovely to talk to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tom.
Jean Schultz is the widow of Peanuts creator Charles Schultz and the president of the Charles M. Schultz Museum. She's also a consultant on The Snoopy Show, which you can find on Apple TV+. I'm Eli Glasner in for Tom Power. 3 years ago, the Winnipeg Art Gallery broke ground on a 40,000 square foot expansion to their museum. In March of this year, that extension finally opened, and it's already changed the conversation around Inuit art in this country. It's called Kalmiyuk, and it's now home to 14,000 pieces of Inuit art, which makes it the largest public collection of contemporary Indigenous art in the world. Heather Iguliukti is an Inuk curator, art professor, and art historian. She's the co-chair of the Winnipeg Art Gallery's Indigenous Advisory Circle, a group that helped consult and create Kalmiyuk. Heather joined Tom Power from Montreal earlier this year.
Hi, Heather. How are you?
Hi, Tom. I'm great. Thanks for having me.
What are you at?
Not much today. Zoom meetings, obviously, like everyone else.
How's it feeling to finally get this thing open?
It was such an amazing feeling to see the building finally open up to the public and to see other people inside of it after so much anticipation and changed dates. It's just so amazing to get to open that space to the world.
So the pandemic sort of changed your plans. Is that what you're saying?
The opening got pushed back and then pushed back again. And then, of course, we had to also pivot to doing a virtual / real opening and figuring out how we can get people to see and appreciate the space online as well as in person. So there was a lot of changing plans, but we also had the opportunity to do some new and innovative things, which we're excited about.
Well, speaking of changing plans and speaking of adapting how things change on, before we start talking about all that stuff, I wanted to talk to you about your own changes. And that's that you were planning on becoming a painter before you became a curator and an art historian. Something kind of happened. Would you mind telling us that story?
Yeah, I mean, it is a long story, but the short version is I had completed my undergraduate degree at NSCAD University in Halifax in painting and drawing and intended on pursuing graduate studies the following year. And then I was in a car accident the night of Hurricane Juan in 2004. That probably brings people back. And couldn't stand or sit or walk or move the left side of my body for I was in physio for over 11 months. And so during that time I started thinking like, well, maybe I'll just do a little bit of research on Inuit art history. I'll learn a little bit that'll inform my artistic practice. And so I applied to Carleton University. And when I started studying Inuit art history, I realized that there was this big wide world of scholarship to be a part of. And then I really sort of turned and focused on art history.
I mean, but while there was this breadth of scholarship, when you first started to pursue Inuit art history and curation, you are the first Inuit art historian to hold a doctoral degree. Were you surprised by the lack of representation in that field?
Yeah, I was totally shocked because where I come from, where I grew up in Goose Bay, everybody is an artist of some kind or another. And so to me, I just didn't really even understand how we could have this 70-year history of modern and contemporary Inuit art and have so many Inuit artists involved in this work and yet have so few Inuit who are on the side of writing about that history. So I saw that there was a big gap to fill.
Is that changing now?
Yeah, I'm not going to be the only one for too much longer. And I'm not the only Inuit art historian, of course, just the first to get a doctorate. But I know of 2 PhD students currently who are also working on getting degrees in Inuit art history, and then also a number of master's students and a lot of students in their undergraduate degrees as well. So it's very exciting right now.
Kalmiyuk is the largest public collection of contemporary Inuit art in the world. Winnipeg, I think from people listening to this right now, might not, they might be thinking, why Winnipeg for something like this, for an Inuit arts center? So why Winnipeg? Why the Winnipeg Art Gallery?
Well, Winnipeg has the country's largest Indigenous population. And there is a big Inuit population in Winnipeg. Of course, there's lots of urban Inuit all across southern Canada as well. And so there is a community there and a really thriving and important community in Winnipeg. But I think that what we were trying to do was to think about how the Winnipeg Art Gallery could grow and expand and be more responsible to its local First Nations, as well as a huge Métis population, and then become more inclusive to Inuit. When they started out, they had the Inuit art collection was really had been crammed into this storage space, not in a bad way, but just, sort of downstairs and not in the light and, sort of brimming over the shelves, if you can imagine, thousands of works in any kind of storage facility. And so this new building really was an opportunity to bring that collection out and share it with the public.
Heather, I'm gonna ask you to do something challenging now.
Okay.
Something hard on the radio. Because we're going to try and talk about something that's very visual on the radio. So can you paint us a picture of the outside of Kamayuk? I hear it's unbelievable.
So Kamayuk is a new building that is joining the existing Winnipeg Art Gallery. And I like to say that the existing building looks like a stone Star Trek insignia. It's kind of an upside down V. Yeah. And so the new building is this big white undulating, it's kind of like a kidney bean shape, and it sits at the top of that V. And the first two stories are all glass. So whereas the existing building was mostly stone, this new building really opens it up and makes it really bright and light. And then on top of that 2 stories of glass is this big kind of white granite floating shape in the sky. So I don't know if that paints a picture or not. But
yeah, I know it's working for me. And can you tell me about the visible vault?
So when you're on the street and you look into those 2-story glass facade, the thing that you can see most prominently is the visible vault, which is this kind of clover-shaped 2-story, 3-story actually, because it goes into the basement as well, glass vault with all glass shelves. It's just, it kind of glitters at night. And it contains, I think, almost 5,000 sculptures made out of stone and bone, of whalebone, and those kinds of things.
Okay, you're doing great with the descriptions here. Let's talk about Inua. If I were to walk into the exhibition space, what would I see?
So the exhibition space is called Kilak, which means sky. And so it really is this big, airy space. I've heard the floor space described as about the size of 2 hockey rinks. And so it's a big open space, again, in that big kind of kidney-shaped kidney bean shaped space. And then on the inside is the inaugural exhibition Inua, which I've curated with 3 emerging curators.
This is, you nailed it, by the way. Like for all of us who can't travel right now, I feel like you nailed it. This show has over 100 works by over 80 Inuit artists from Canada and from Alaska and from Greenland. But I understand one item in the exhibition has particularly special meaning to you, and you were connected with it over social media. Could you tell us that story?
Yeah, at the beginning of the installation inside of Inua, the first exhibition, is a installation of 4 works, 1 work for each of the 4 curators made by one of our ancestors. And mine is a caribou hide beaded purse made by my Anansiak, my grandmother, that I had never seen before last year. Someone reached out to me with a Twitter message and just said, "Hey, I think that your grandmother made these." This wonderful man in Newfoundland reached out and said that his grandmother and my grandmother had spent some time in a hospital in St. Anthony together, and she had given her these gifts. And so he had them in his family, and he saw my name on the news or something, and just looked me up and then offered to loan them to the exhibition. So it's pretty incredible. When we were unwrapping the works and getting ready for installation, as soon as we opened that one up, I burst into tears. It was like my grandmother was reaching out to me, across time.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what did you feel when you held it?
Well, you don't really hold things when you're in the museum. You're not supposed. I did touch it. It was just an incredible experience to feel something that had been made by her hand. She passed away when I was a little girl, and people would say that I was just like her when I was growing up, and that I had, when I would do something, they'd say, "Oh, that's just the way your grandmother would have done that." And so it was really amazing to kind of reignite that bond.
I'm Tom Power. You're listening to Q. I'm speaking with curator, art historian, and art professor Heather Agluliyukti. Heather is the lead curator of Inua, the first exhibit at the Winnipeg Art Gallery's new Inuit Art Center, Kamayuk. What does Inuit art look like in 2021?
I think Inuit art, and this year and for a long time now, has been anything made by an Inuk. And I think that that's one of the really exciting things that we wanted to share, is that Inuit art is everything that people love, and I think probably think of immediately when I say Inuit art. So it's prints and drawings and sculptures, but it's also drone photography and painting and animation and wearable art. Like it's kind of, it can be anything.
I heard there's a spacesuit.
There is a sealskin spacesuit in the exhibition that was made by artist Jesse Tungulik. It is the creation that he thought about from when he was a little boy and used to put on his big traditional parka and then kind of hop around on the tundra and pretend that he was on the surface of the moon. So this is like a realization project for him. It's awesome.
This is amazing. So I understand that there was an Indigenous advisory circle that consulted and collaborated on Kamayok before they even broke ground on the museum in 2018, and that you're the co-chair of that advisory circle. Why was it so important to have that circle involved in the museum's creation?
Yeah, in 2015, actually, two really important people got hired by the institution. Jamie Isaac became the first curator of Indigenous and contemporary art, and Julie Nagum was cross-appointed to the University of Winnipeg and the Winnipeg Art Gallery as a research chair. And so that is a First Nations curator and a Métis scholar, and they came together and came up with the idea that would later become the Indigenous Advisory Circle in 2017. And so we get together every year. Obviously, this year has been virtually, but we have been getting together every year and just thinking through some of the issues that still persist around museums, and then trying to come up with new solutions for how we can decolonize institutions in the present. The circle is made up of Indigenous peoples from all over Manitoba, so First Nations and Métis peoples from all over Manitoba, as well as Inuit and Inuvialuit representatives from all across the north.
And the Advisory Council created naming initiatives, but new jobs for Inuit arts workers as well. Why was this so important for the group?
Well, I think it's really critical that you can't decolonize an institution or make changes that indigenize an institution without Indigenous peoples. And so we really felt strongly that that needed to be at all levels of the institution. And so it's really critical to have curatorial staff, but also management staff. They've hired this brilliant Director of Indigenous Initiatives, Julia Lafreniere. And so she has done an amazing job of making sure that communities are reached out to and in communication with, and that elders feel like they are being respected and involved from all across the province. So that's been really, I think, critical to the success of the opening, has been how respectful and that process has been on her end. But then we also, right now, there's a current position open for an Indigenous educator. In fact, they also hired Jocelyn Perinen, who's the first full-time Inuit curatorial staff member at that museum, and one of the only full-time Inuit curators at an institution across the country. So really doing some revolutionary work there, I think.
I mean, so we've been talking to you sort of in your role as one of the leading experts of Inuit art on the continent. But putting together this project, did you learn anything new about Inuit art?
I think that what has been really amazing to see is to really think about how we are all connected to each other in ways that go beyond not just our borders across, Arctic Quebec and like Newfoundland and Labrador to Nunavut to other regions, but to really see how Inuit artists are working through the same themes and ideas and share the same ideas around kinship from Alaska and Siberia all the way to Greenland. And so that has been really exciting. And something really thrilling for me is to start to see more and more around our connections across the circumpolar world.
Do you have a favorite piece? Maybe not. Maybe I won't get you to pick a favorite, but do you have a piece in there that's of special meaning to you?
I love every single work in the show. There is this one. Obviously my grandmother's work is my favorite piece in the exhibition, but we're really, really proud of the installation itself. We worked with an Inuk architecture student who's actually just graduated from her master's degree, Nicole Luke. And with her, we set up the exhibition so that it was, because it is just kind of a big, wide open space, we created the exhibition by using drawing on the informal architectures of the Arctic. So you'll see a recreation of Zacharias Kunuk's hunting cabin. And there's a shipping container, a full-scale shipping container in the space that's used as a kind of a little theater for an animated artwork and mural. And we've got like the inside of a living room is another artist's work by Lindsay McIntyre as a whole installation. And so we kind of used architecture that you would encounter in the North as a way to frame all the works in the exhibition. So that has been a really interesting process, I think, and something that I think that when Inuit visit the exhibition, they're really going to get it.
Heather Byatt, lovely to talk to you.
This has been so great, Tom. It's lovely to talk to you too.
Heather Igliukti is the co-chair of the Winnipeg Art Gallery's Indigenous Advisory Circle and the lead curator of Inua, the inaugural exhibition at Kalmayuk. Inua is now open and runs until December, and whether or not you're from Winnipeg, you can still experience Kalmayuk from your own home virtually. Go to wag.ca to check it out. And that's it for Q today. Coming up on tomorrow's show, Yo-Yo Ma and what started as a hashtag, Songs of Comfort, and have become a way to actually provide comfort to listeners around the world and have become, well, Yo-Yo Ma's next album. All that and more on tomorrow's show. I'm Eli Glasner, sitting in for Tom Power. Thanks for listening.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.